So Ryan, let's we've broken down the game. We had our statistical matchup earlier in the week. We kind of talked about what's at stake for Notre Dame today. Earlier in the week, we did our keys to victory yesterday. Mm-hmm. So now it's prediction time, Ryan, and we're going to dive into sort of how we see this game playing. We made our predictions at irishbreakdown.com. You can see the article there. We also have made predictions for Tennessee and LSU. We've made predictions for Oklahoma and Texas, and we also made predictions for Kansas and TCU, which is one of the biggest games of the weekend. I started that article off with, raise your hand if you thought TCU and Kansas would be the biggest game of the Big 12. And I was like, put your hands down, Coach Leopold and Coach Dykes. Anyone else? Nobody? I mean, who predicted this coming into the season?
I started my excerpt with the same thing, Brian. I'm just like, who would have thought that TCU and Kansas would be a big game 4 games into the season?
Yes.
You would not have guessed that one.
So we'll preview all those games at the end, but we have all those at irishbreakdown.com as well, sort of our predictions and those brief snippets. But what everybody came here for today, Ryan, was our predictions of the Notre Dame BYU game. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our prediction and give our score prediction and just kind of discuss how we see the game playing out. The second part of what we'll do is we'll kind of hand out, if what we think happens, who will be the game ball recipients, who will be the driving forces behind that, just having a little bit of fun with that from a prediction standpoint. And then the final piece, kind of looking back at our keys to victory yesterday, what are the things that we're most confident in that will happen? Now, those are all things that need to happen for Notre Dame to win and win the way they're capable of. But what are we most confident will actually happen? So that's what we're going to do today. So, Ryan, so let's begin with your look at how you think that what was your prediction score for this game, how you got to that score, and then also a little bit extra of what you and I were kind of talking about before the show started. I wanted to give some insight to the folks about what kind of goes through our minds as we're doing these things.
Brian, the reason I love kind of how we build up to the end of the week is that as I watch more and more film and I kind of talk ball and talk it out with you a little bit, there are parts of the game that I become more positive with. There's more parts of the game that I become a little more negative, or that there's a little more of a question mark in my mind. So there's been a couple weeks that at the beginning of the week, I felt a totally different sense than I did at the end of the week. One was after the Marshall game against Cal, because I was just, you were down in the dumps, man. And the more you watch Cal, you were just kind of like, hey, man, like they're a tough defense. Like they might give Notre Dame a little bit of problems. And I think that both of our predictions for the Cal week were actually pretty spot on, As I watch more and more of BYU over this year and just kind of evaluate where Notre Dame's strengths are, where BYU's weaknesses are, where BYU's strengths are, where Notre Dame's questionable areas, I ended up picking in this game Notre Dame to win 31-20, because I think that there's a lot of good parts to this BYU team. Jaron Hall is a really talented quarterback, though I think is going to give Notre Dame a couple fits at times, where you're just like, got him. Oh, he's out of the pocket. He extends the play for a nice throw, right? And there's guys on the defensive side of the football that I think are good football players, like Ben Bywater and Caleb Hayes at cornerback, who I think are going to have the potential to give Notre Dame a little bit of problems at times. But I'll be very honest about this one. And my inkling has not really failed me in the past, so I'm okay with putting it out in the universe. I picked 31-20, but the more homework I do on this and the more I watch BYU, I think Notre Dame can run away with this one, man. Like, I would not be shocked if Notre Dame ends up winning by 20-plus points in this game. Like, I think that Notre Dame is just much more talented than BYU, and BYU is weak in certain spots that BYU is weak in certain spots, Brian, that coming into the game, I thought that they would be stronger in. Coming into the season, I thought that they would be stronger in. So I am predicting a 31-20 victory, but I am getting a little cautious because I think Notre Dame might even be better than I'm giving them credit for. I think they might be heading in the better direction, and I think that Notre Dame has a chance to have a very convincing win on Saturday.
Ryan, it's kind of interesting that you say that, because you and I are kind of looking at this in two completely different ways a little bit. For me, I look at it and I the way that I kind of do predictions is I kind of go with what the game should be. I went 38-20. And the reason is because of those matchup advantages that Notre Dame has. I mean, I think that when you look at Notre Dame, they should win the battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They should be able to get their ground game going, which should open up opportunities to get the ball in space in the passing game. They should be able to out-leverage BYU on the perimeter. They should be able to shut down the BYU run game. They should be able to keep the BYU receivers in check because that's been a strength of this Notre Dame football team. The area where BYU is the best thing about their entire football team is their pass game. Yep. Notre Dame has already faced two teams that have a better passing game, and they held both of them in check. I mean, they held CJ Stroud to what, 227 yards, something around there, right? They held Drake May threw for 301, but like 140 that came on two passes when the game was basically over, and so, they had 215 yards on 4 completions, 2 of which, like I said, were when the game was in doubt. So that's been the strength of this football team. And so Notre Dame will have to not play well in areas that they have consistently played well so far this season to not win this game convincingly based on what the matchups are. I think that's where I am. However, the funny thing is, yes, I could see it being 38-20. Notre Dame kind of runs the clock out at the end, wins a convincing victory. I don't see it being – it shouldn't be necessarily competitive for 4 quarters. I have the opposite approach, though, because I went with what should happen. And instead, but I kind of have that, but man, this team still has a lot to prove to me, and that's kind of, so like we look at it a little bit differently. Like I think this game could be a blowout. 38-20 is what I predicted. I could see it being 45-20. I could see it being 44-17. I could see the defense really shutting BYU down. I don't think that they will, but they could.
Yep.
They're capable of it. And I think the offense could get hot, and then Notre Dame really puts them away in the second half. I could see that, but I just can't predict it yet because there's still so much uncertainty about this football team. Drew Pine played great against North Carolina, but North Carolina is not very good on defense, right? And, the defensive line dominated the North Carolina offensive line, but it's not a very good offensive line. Neither's Cal. And Marcus Freeman even said this week when he's talking about self-scouting. He's like, there's just such a small sample size. It's really hard, to get the bigger grasp that you would have if you had like a bye week at the end of October.
Right.
And so I think that's a very fair comment. So this team is capable. There's nothing about this football team that makes me say, you know what? I just don't think the talent is what I thought it should be. And as we said before the season, before Tyler Buckner got hurt, Drew Pine can beat a lot of football teams. If the talent around him plays to their potential and you give him time and you scheme to what he does well, Drew Pine can beat a lot of football teams. BYU is not one of the teams that we thought they might lose to if Drew Pine is your starting quarterback, right? It will require more than just Drew Pine not playing well. And so it should be a convincing win, but I'm still in a little bit of show me mode, Ryan, which is partly why I've emphasized this week so much on how important this game is, because I am still so very much in I know what this team could be, but what is this team going to be? I'm still there, Ryan, and I haven't quite got out of that. North Carolina helped. That game helped. The way that they controlled Carolina really for much of the game, even when the game was competitive early, you just kind of felt like Notre Dame's about to take off with this thing. You just felt good about where they were, but then they kind of don't put the team away and, stuff like that, which I can live with. I mean, it's not like the game was in doubt, but those are just the things that I look at, Ryan, and say, this is what should happen. What you said that you think is going to happen is exactly what should happen. I think you're spot on. I just am still, I got to see it, right? I've got to see it.
I think what's making me feel the way, though, Bryan, like that maybe I'm overestimating, how close BYU can keep this football game or how at the competitive level of this game is just something that you said, actually. It's that where BYU's biggest strengths are what Notre Dame's playing pretty well against, wide receivers and passing game have not killed Notre Dame up to this point, right? Like it's been a couple plays here and there against North Carolina. Like that was kind of I think Notre Dame's, what we assume to be the weak points of their game have kind of been strengths in a lot of instances, right? Like the secondary has been a strength. The special teams has been a strength. When you look at BYU, they have a really nice passing game, but Notre Dame's secondary has been playing pretty well. The defensive line has been playing better over the last couple weeks. It's that weakness I mean, that's strength for BYU. I just don't know how high of a strength or to what degree that strength will be. And then when you're talking about Notre Dame on the offensive side of the ball, I've seen some people in the chat, and I agree with you completely. Notre Dame's offense is still in a show me mode, 100%.
Yes.
I am not fully there like, oh, well, Notre Dame figured it out. Not even close. It was a good step against North Carolina. Now let's do it against a better defense. Like, that's where I am, right? So I'm not sitting here and saying that Notre Dame's going to score 40 points because I just think that they found it, they figured it out, all that type of stuff. When I watch BYU's film, I'm just like, look, their defensive line is not that great. They don't create a lot of pressure. That's what I really worry most about against Notre Dame's offense in general, is the ability for the offensive line to consistently pick up the pressure and for Drew Pine to be comfortable. And I don't think that they're going to make them incredibly uncomfortable. And the secondary, while I commented and said, like, and I agree, and I still believe this, that they're a really well-coached and solid secondary. I don't think they're star-studded, right? Like, I don't think that they're
Moore's
like the
not
second
playing in this game either.
Exactly. So I don't think there's like these big play secondary players back there for BYU where, like, oh man, a bad read, a late throw, and it's a pick six, like, automatically, right? Like, I don't think
Ryan,
that
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
They remind me a lot of Wisconsin's secondary last year, but not as good at corner. Right? Like, Wisconsin last year had a good, solid secondary that could keep points down against most teams. But at the end of the day, if they couldn't generate pressure on the quarterback, you could have success against them. Yep. And Notre Dame was getting open against Wisconsin last year enough to make some plays. We saw Drew Pine have some success leading down on some drives. And I would argue that this Notre Dame team should be in a better position than last year's Notre Dame team in that game, because this year's Notre Dame team has shown that they're able to run the football, where early last season that team couldn't run the football and you could just play the pass.
Right.
So I look at it and I say, to your point, like, I see everything that you see, Ryan. I'm with you. I watch the film and I'm like, man, this Notre Dame team should expose that. They should dominate that. Jaron Hall's a really good college quarterback. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not CJ Stroud. He's not, players that they faced, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, guys that Notre Dame has had to face in the past.
I don't even think he's Drake May, if I'm being honest. Like, I just
upside wise agree. Where I'd like Jaron is he's experienced and savvy and those type of things. But to your point, yes, this is a game that Notre Dame should win. But every time I'm breaking down film, I start to get a little fired up about how much Notre Dame's going to dominate. You know what pops in my head? 26-21.
I get that.
Score the Marshall game. I mean, we're not even a month away from the Marshall game yet. And so that's the thing that kind of comes back why I say I'm still in show me mode, because I know how bad North Carolina is. Now, having said that, my score prediction for the North Carolina game last week was what, like 31-17? I think is what it was, because I said, look, I can't predict a breakout from the offense until they show it to me. Well, they kind of showed it to me. They not only scored 45, but they had it 45 plus a fumble into the end zone. You missed a field goal. You missed a 4th and 1 opportunity. You got stopped on 4th and 1. You missed your tight end for what would have been a 60-yard touchdown, wide open up the sideline. I mean, you left a lot of points on the board, and that's a positive. I'm not saying that to criticize them. You need to execute those plays, but I feel like this team in the last 3 weeks is kind of what they screwed up against Marshall. We didn't see as much against Cal. The mistakes they made against Cal, we didn't see against North Carolina. Right, this team has built to a degree on offense, and if the offensive line plays the way they're capable of, then I think they should do all that. But I just keep going back to they have to show it to me, right? I'll tell you, like, I won't be shocked at all or surprised at all if Notre Dame wins this game convincingly. I won't.
I wouldn't.
But I'm also not going to be shocked based on what we've seen the first 3 weeks of the season if this is a close football game. I mean, is BYU worse than Cal? No. And Notre Dame beat Cal by a touchdown in a game where Cal had a chance at the end of the game to tie it up with a Hail Mary.
Yep.
So I just need to see it. But if they do what you and I say they're capable of, Ryan, that is when you start to say, okay, this next month is going to be a lot of fun. And if they don't, then it's going to be like this next month is going to be not pleasant. Not pleasant at all for this football team. But I think they get it done.
I'll say this, Brian. I think the key for whether it is a really close football game or Notre Dame kind of distance themselves late is how fast of a start they get off to. Like, I really think that is very, very important for this game, because we saw it again. Like you mentioned, Cal that ended 24-16, right? Part of the reason that it ended that score was because Notre Dame didn't really kick into gear until the end of the second quarter, going into the third quarter, right? Like they played really poor football the first quarter and a half. They got off to a slow start against Cal. Yeah.
Right.
So I think if they started fast against Cal, they run them out of the building a little bit, at least a couple touchdowns.
Or if they play the second half, if they play the whole game the way they did the second half, it's a 34-13 game.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. And then they carried that momentum into the North Carolina game offensively. Right. And so, yes, you are correct. It's going to be interesting. And the other thing is, this is still a team that you say, okay, one thing I'm confident in that gives me optimism that I'm at least going to get it right that Notre Dame wins, even though I don't know if the score prediction will be close to correct, is that with a young football team, an inexperienced football team, you worry about in an environment like this. You're in Las Vegas, a huge NFL stadium. It's like, like Jerry World. It's just an exotic stadium, all these other type of things. You're away from home. Ohio State is still yet to play a game away from home, right? Notre Dame's not in that situation. This is going to be your third game away from home. You've played in Columbus, which is one of the loudest environments in college football, one of the best environments in college football. You played at North Carolina, which the crowd there was incredibly disappointing, and Notre Dame kind of quieted them pretty early. But it's still away from home against a really good opponent, at least on one side of the ball. So the environment shouldn't be too much for them, Ryan, I don't think. And I like the fact that they didn't fly out till I think this morning to Las Vegas. So there's a better chance that your players are going to be locked in, because you're treating it like a normal road game instead of treating it like kind of a mini bowl game.
Like a vacation. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so I do think they'll at least be prepared for that.
Yep.
Right. And the other thing too, and somebody just mentioned this too, like Notre Dame is tested going into this game as well. But the counter to that is so is BYU. I mean, they did play Baylor, they did play Oregon. I would argue Notre Dame's a little bit more tested because they've also played Ohio State, North Carolina, Cal, and even Marshall is a test. I mean, if Marshall's probably the most inferior opponent Notre Dame has played so far. Yep. They're a 3-2 football team that beat Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So they're at least tested, and I'm very curious to see how the attitude is coming out of the break. That's going to be a very, very interesting aspect of this. So let me ask you this. Well, let me quickly give just the scores I do want to give the scores that the other staff members had for this game, Ryan, just so everybody understands the entire scope of it. Vince and I were very close. I had 38-20. Vince had 37-20 in favor of Notre Dame. Ryan, you were 31-20. You were very close to Sean Davis, who went 31-21. So you and Sean were very close. Me and Vince and I were very close. Sean Stiers has it Notre Dame 38, BYU 24, and Andrew McDonough has the same score as Sean Davis, 31-21.